All right, everybody, let's get started again. And thanks very much. Of course, as soon as my time starts, the furnace kicks in. So hopefully that's not too much of a problem. My name is John Roach, and I'm here to talk to you about reviewing our small ponds to ensure they're built properly. A lot of us are very familiar with the review process. So what I'm hoping to offer here are some take-home tidbits and things to chew on to help improve the review process throughout the state, ensure good quality and consistency, and also to encourage some of our newer reviewers and newer staff to follow some of these practices and learn from the more seasoned staff as well. So as reviewers, we know review isn't necessarily an easy task, right? There's a lot of pressures that reviewers face on a daily basis. We're pressured to ensure that the design is adequate and safe, and sometimes that's always not clear of what that means. There's always pressure to review faster, and then, of course, occasionally political or other development pressure to allow for shortcuts or some special exemptions or something to make their project jump to the top of the list and get done faster. And hopefully for all of us overarching that, there is a personal, moral, ethical, professional pressure to do the right thing. So review is, again, it's not an easy task. And sometimes our review tool chests leaves a bit to be desired, right? We've been talking about this in some of our past sessions about some of the guidance documents that are being put out there to help explain or clarify certain elements of regulation that may not be explicitly clear. We've talked about the need to update Maryland 378. But beyond those major overhauls, which are going to take time and are a heavy lift, what can we do to help kind of make that toolbox a little fuller and make our reviews a little easier for ourselves, but again, complete and accurate for the community that is affected by these ponds. I like this quote here by Mark Twain. If you're into process improvement or you've heard of lean, which stemmed from manufacturing, but it applies in all sorts of government processes as well. The idea is that continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. And I think that's a lot of what we've been trying to espouse here in these seminars, is that we're trying to do incremental steps as we build up to some of those more heavier lifts. But we'd rather get those incremental steps out there and start working on them and practicing them instead of staying silent for another few more years while the delayed perfection happens. So I've thought of, three kind of overarching topics that we should talk about and think about as reviewers to ensure that we're doing the best we can given the tools we have. The first idea is tunnel vision. All right, so a lot of us reviewers might be trained as civil engineers, and civil engineers often have a specialty, right? I'm a geotechnical engineer. A lot of folks are water resources engineers. There might be structural engineers or just general site civil, but that's not it, right? We've also got agricultural engineers. We have natural resources planners who might have specializations in biology or ecology or other areas. We might have people who work in planning and zoning departments and have a whole nother broad array of specializations. And those specializations are great, right? They help us really focus down on important nitty-gritty details. It's very hard to be a very good small pond reviewer these days because the breadth with which you have to be able to be knowledgeable in is so large, right? You have to have elements of all of these understandings of all of these elements to really do a great review. So the question is, as we tend to, it's human nature to focus within the areas where we're most comfortable when we do the review. And what that means, we might be missing things unintentionally, for sure. So to kind of illustrate this point, I made some sketches. They're exaggerated, but the idea was, let's ask a geotechnical engineer and a water resources engineer. You've got unlimited time and budget. Design your perfect small pond, right? So let's look at what the geotechnical engineer might say. All right, a geotechnical engineer, they're excited about this unlimited time and budget. They are going to do some intense subsurface explorations, lots of laboratory testing, maybe some finite element slope stability and seepage models. They are going to use all that information to design a really robust embankment, right? They're going to focus on that constructed embankment made of earth and materials. They're going to have a really significant impervious core and cutoff, some blankets, filter drains, filters and all that kind of stuff. They're really going to focus on that. But they have to convey the water, right? So put in a pipe somewhere, I guess. So again, they're suffering from tunnel vision here. They're really hammering down on their principal area of expertise, but forgetting some of the bigger picture. The reason why we're putting these ponds in, managed stormwater for recreation, flood control, all of that kind of stuff. And to do that, we have to convey the water safely. So let's look at the water resources engineer conversely. They might be excited. They might lick their chops and say, now is a chance for me to do some calibrated hydrology studies, site-specific rainfall analysis, advanced fluid dynamic spillway analysis, design some fancy stilling basins so they have really non-erosive flows coming downstream. They're going to dive into that riser design, right? And have maybe multiple low-level outlets and weir stages. They're going to control all the storms. They're going to control all the impervious area. Maybe they're adding some technology here and there to do that. They're really conveying the water in the most extremely best way possible, but perhaps they're missing some of those geotechnical hazards that are out there, just as the geotechnical engineer missed, the water resources aspect. Maybe they're going to put that riser on a big pocket of peat or otherwise unsuitable soil. It's going to settle and crack, and now we're not controlling properly because our weir elevations are off as the thing settles. So again, this is kind of a cartoon exaggeration example, but it kind of drives home the idea of our tunnel vision, our human tendency to drive towards what our specialty is without considering the big picture. So what are ways to combat tunnel vision? I think we need to think strategically when we enter into the reviews. We need to be reminding ourselves what we need to look for and where to find it, how it might be presented. So to do that, you might have some job aids or checklists, some review documentation checklists. Is the factor of safety this? Is the 10-year water surface elevation that? And you're going to use those, and hopefully you've developed those. And if not, I encourage you to develop those job aids and checklists to make sure you're getting everything, not just the areas where you would, habitually tend to focus on. What I would also really recommend is that we should employ a broader use of multidisciplinary review teams as opposed to a single person doing all the review. Now, in some cases, that single person in some projects combine, that person in that project, in a lot of cases, that may be perfectly adequate. That may be more than adequate. I'm not saying every project needs to have 10 hands in it. But what I'm saying is there are certainly projects that are more complicated for one reason or another. They have unique site constraints, they have unique designs, other challenges that really warrants and would benefit from more than one reviewer, particularly more than one reviewer with different areas of expertise to participate in the design. And we do that in our dam safety reviews all the time, whether it comes from the H&H side and the geotechnical and structural sides, but you can benefit from some small ponds in that way too. Another thing I'd like to remind people, and Jennifer touched on this wonderfully in her presentations, don't forget to look at the big picture. Don't forget to look at the project holistically. Your review might be for small pond MD 378 compliance, but it's important to flag other stormwater management and other issues that you might see in your review. It's going to improve the overall review, improve the project that's delivered to the public. So these are really important things to think about as you're approaching the review process. All right, another item to think about in the review process is the need to ensure adequate training. We've heard this in your surveys that you've provided to us, and we have seen it, and I know from speaking to some persons, you have seen it too, that the training is lacking both in the review side and the design side. All right, I'm not calling out anybody in particular or any areas, but we need to ensure that we're all trained. And that is true for seasoned professionals because things have changed, state of practice has changed, as well as newer professionals in this field. It's also important to recognize that Maryland 378 Pond Code is a simplified design practice, right? We have taken the lessons learned from design of larger, more complex structures and simplified it down so that it can be applied easier, it can be reviewed easier, and it's kind of scaled commensurate with the risk of these structures. That makes sense. I'm not saying that we should necessarily move away from that, but it is really important in some cases to understand where these simplifications came from, right? What the complex issue was that was distilled down. For example, why is it that the upstream plus downstream slopes combined to be 5 horizontal to 1 vertical or flatter is in there, right? There's some logic behind that. And it's important for us to know some of this background information so that if a unique circumstance comes up or a different project comes up, that rule of thumb that's in 378 may not always apply, may not always result in an adequate and safe design. So remember, there's a big world out there. There's many ways to design certain things correctly, and we all need to remain current with the state of practice. And our employers, and hopefully there's some folks in managerial roles here, need to ensure that their staff is adequately trained too. So how do we get that training? Well, sitting here today is one of those elements. And we love to provide training at MDE, but it is, one of our many aspects of our mission in the sediment, stormwater, and dam safety program, right? We have to write permits, we have to inspect dams, we have to do emergency preparedness and response activities. There's just a huge array of our mission. Training is one of it, though. And so traditionally, we have provided a dam owners workshop in the fall. Look for an announcement coming for that soon. We're actually going to be holding it virtually this year, probably in the end of January, as opposed to this time frame right now. We've done HECRAS training, kind of once we get a critical mass, enough people who want to participate, we offer those sessions. We do lots of emergency preparedness and dam safety 101 with dam owners in local jurisdictions and the engineering community, so they're kind of up to speed on where things are. We've released these guidance documents that I talked about in my last presentation. And we have a good reference library that we are happy to share with folks if they need additional knowledge on certain topics. So that being said, I'd like to request that everybody take a moment during this presentation to enter in the chat box, what are your top 3 training needs? And try to be somewhat specific. What are the areas that you see the most need in your organization or personally to succeed in your reviews? If you would please put that in the chat box, we'll compile those. And if we can, and I hope we do, we'll start developing some training courses to meet those unmet needs as well. All right, so that's the free training that's out there. But training is an investment, right? It's an investment in our staff. It's an investment in our organization. It's an investment in the design, construction, and operation of better small ponds throughout the state. So sometimes we have to spend money. And let me offer to you a few organizations that we use to obtain training that we find valuable. And many of you may already know of some of these. Of course, the American Society of Civil Engineers is out there offering a wide variety of training. I'll note that their HECRAS seminars that they've put on, our staff have found them to be really valuable and high quality training. And I will mention, however, that some of their webinars, short 1 or 2 hour webinars about dams design and construction, sometimes leave a little bit to be desired. So I wouldn't necessarily invest in those webinars at ASCE, but their seminars are great. There's also the Association of State Dam Safety Officials and the United States Society of Dams. Both of their website links are on this screen. Both organizations are pretty similar in mission. ASDSO is more focused for the regulator side, whereas USSD is more focused on the private consulting side. That's kind of the bulk of each of their memberships. But each organization offers wonderful webinars, wonderful seminars, annual conferences, regional conferences, and ASDSO also has the Journal of Dam Safety, which is a quarterly publication that provides really good technical articles and just articles of interest for the dam and small pond community. So I would totally recommend looking at what they have. Usually it's relatively affordable, particularly if you can get multiple people in a room participating in some of these webinars. The cost is driven down quite a bit. And again, some of the topics may be too big, maybe really, you know, big picture, big dam stuff. Admittedly, some of our own staff, you know, it just doesn't apply to what happens in Maryland. You know, we're not dealing with Hoover Dam. But a lot of it's really good. And again, it takes that big picture that you can then use as a frame of reference when you're applying the rules of thumb that are in 378. Lastly, I'll mention the FEMA National Dam Safety Program Technical Seminar that's held every year on President's Day weekend up at the FEMA Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland. So it's really local to us. We're extraordinarily lucky. 2 to 3 day seminar with national leaders in various dam safety topics. This year it will be virtual, and the cost is generally the cost for room and board at the Institute, which is $75 for 3 days. A real benefit there. So take a look at all of these. All right, the last thing I want to talk about before I relinquish to Charlie and Pat, who are going to have some great conversations about construction and operation and maintenance, is reinforcing the idea that Jennifer has already brought up and that Charlie and Pat will too, is what I'm calling approving for the future. Okay, right? So a good review considers the future operation and maintenance, not just the ultimate land development and what kind of water might run in and out. But we have to think about, as you're reviewing, is this constructible? Can it be built? Are there site constraints that don't make sense? And likewise, can it be maintained? Let's take a look at that 5 horizontal to 1 vertical slopes issue. And I know Howard County actually recently learned that they don't allow that. They require both of them to be 3 horizontal to 1 or flatter. Why is that? Well, quite frankly, a 2 horizontal to 1 vertical downstream slope can't be mowed by most people without specialized equipment or expertise. So when you think about can it be maintained, think about a developer might be building this property now, but as Jennifer mentioned, it's going to get passed off to an HOA. An HOA, in my experience, doesn't like to collect hefty dues, and certainly if they do, they want to spend that on community amenities like recreation or, you know, housekeeping issues, not on small pond maintenance. So what that means is when this pond slopes become difficult to mow, they stop mowing. And then they became pond forests, and that's a whole nother big issue. So think about, as you're reviewing, you know, can the slopes be mowed? Are there adequate access for maintenance and woody vegetation control? Think about these capabilities. Now, that being said, you know, moving forward, I still do want to mention that we do need to think about the upstream and downstream development. Will there be new lots created in the pond or dam area? Will there be development upstream that could cause increased flows? Will there be development downstream that could cause hazard creep? And think about that stuff not just on the parcel being developed, but in the whole watershed that is flowing to this pond as well. You know, if it looks like up and down this corridor, every farm is being developed into large lot subdivisions, and, you know, the next farm above your project is still a farm, it's probably going to be redeveloped at some point in the future. So think about that as we're reviewing it. And then also think about any unique conditions that could cause premature wear or failure of components. We learned last week about some acidic soils in southern Maryland. What about heavy debris loads or sediment loads? Brackish water that might result from sea level rises. All of those things, think about, is the design robust? Corrugated metal pipe may be appropriate in some cases, but if it's going to be ripped up and removed in only a few years because it's worn out, it doesn't make sense to approve it nowadays. And then lastly, what I want to kind of talk about is avoiding design by review. We see this sometimes. A designer who may be new to the area or new to small ponds comes in with, quite frankly, really inadequate plan sets and reports. They're just It's not good. But they look to us to hold hands, very much hold hands, to get the project to the finish line. And sometimes that's warranted. And sometimes our providing that training to the design community is perfectly adequate. But in the whole spirit of making sure that we have a broad knowledge base and a well-educated design and review community, recognize if you're being taken advantage of and point out to the designers how they can get that training that you have, that you've benefited from. The idea that this whole, what's in your pond series is that we're trying to talk about here is building it better, right? Building these ponds better so that they're operated and maintained better. That's going to mean once they're built better, they should need less maintenance and less major repairs. And for what that means for the review community is hopefully less work for us in the long run, which is great. Frees us up to do some other things. All right, with the minute or so I have left, I have 2 slides I just want to call to your attention. When these slides are released to everybody, and they will be, give us some time, we're going to get these out to the attendees. This will all be hyperlinks. You'll be able to click each one of these links and download the document. I find these to be some of the top resource documents that all dam and small pond reviewers should have at their fingertips. You may not use it every day. You may use it only once a year, but these are the big picture design ideas that we distill down into 378 in our practices in Maryland. Take a look at them. The FEMA Manual of Conduits Through Embankments, the NRCS Filter Diaphragm design information. These are all really good information, really good documents. We should all have them available and be familiar with them as much as we can. And then lastly, I'll put out another call, a final call for our small pond work groups. We have a link up on the MDE Dam Safety webpage. I think it says Small Pond Interest Work Group. Sign up there if you want to participate in some of the sessions that we'll be holding, the work group sessions, where we try to dig into some of the technical issues and see what we can do to advance it forward, whether it be starting working on chapters of a new 378 or new design, interim design recommendations and guidance documents. Please, if you're interested, sign up. And that's what I have for you today. Thank you so very much for participating in these sessions. You can always reach out to us if you have questions in the future. But right now, what I'll do is I'll ask our moderators, if we have any time for questions, and if there are questions, we'll try to answer them.